In the beginning, when the earth was still new and the sky was vast, humanity's first brothers, Cain and Abel, walked the earth. Born of Adam and Eve, they were part of a family once set in the perfection of Eden. But with the fall of man, their lives would follow a different path, one of toil, sacrifice, and ultimately tragedy. Cain, the firstborn, grew to be a farmer. Abel, his younger brother, a shepherd. Both brought offerings to God, but only Abel's sacrifice was accepted, for it was offered in sincerity and with the right heart. Cain, angry and full of pride, allowed the seed of jealousy to grow in his heart. Despite a warning from God, Cain's bitterness overcame him, and in a field outside the city, his jealousy turned to violence. He killed his brother Abel. Thus began the first murder, a death that shattered the very foundation of brotherhood, family, and creation. The earth itself recoiled from Cain's action, and God confronted him with his sin, marking him for exile, for his heart had hardened beyond repair. But even in judgment, there was mercy. Cain, though exiled, would live on. And though Abel was dead, his blood cried out for justice, and a new legacy would soon begin through his younger brother, Seth. The story of Cain and Abel is not only one of violence and sorrow, but a warning, a reminder that unchecked sin can lead to irreversible consequences. It is also a tale of redemption, for even in Cain's wandering, God's grace remained. The land outside Eden pulsed with a strange stillness. Gone was the lush perfection of the garden where time once walked hand in hand with the Creator. Now, Adam and Eve lived in the hardness of soil and season, clothed not in innocence but in the weight of knowledge. Yet in that ache of exile, a flicker of hope stirred, a promise once spoken by God, that a seed would come from the woman, a seed that would crush the serpent's head. Eve held on to that promise with trembling faith. It was in the dawn of one such hope that Cain was born. He came with a cry that pierced the morning mist. His small body trembled in Eve's arms, and though pain had accompanied his arrival, deep, wrenching pain, her face gleamed with a fragile joy. "I have gotten a man from the Lord," she whispered, naming him Cain, the acquired one. Adam stood beside her, silent and awestruck, not at the child but at what it meant they were now creators of life themselves. The curse had not broken them entirely. But Eve's eyes held something deeper than mere maternal affection. In Cain she saw not just a child, but possibly the child, the promised Redeemer. Could he be the one to restore what they had lost? Cain's infancy passed in the warmth of family and soil. He crawled among wild grasses and played with lambs who had no fear. He grew to know the smell of earth, the sound of wind, and the voice of his mother singing the stories of Eden under the moonlight. His eyes, dark and searching, studied his father as he tilled the land. Often he would run alongside Adam's footsteps, repeating the names of herbs, seeds, and stones with earnest curiosity. Then came Abel, a gentler cry on a quieter morning. Where Cain had stormed into the world, Abel arrived like a hush of rain. Eve held him differently, not with the hope of a warrior king, but with the love one reserves for a breeze that passes gently through the trees. She named him Abel, meaning breath or vapor. Something in her knew his life would not be long, but it would be full of meaning. The brothers grew side by side, yet ever so differently. Cain was fire, bold, forceful, quick to lead. He was driven by order and ambition. The soil responded to his hands with grudging respect, and under his command the fields bore fruit. He was proud of his strength, his knowledge of the land, his ability to command growth from what had been cursed. Abel was water, reflective, soft, and still. He delighted in the rhythm of nature, in the bleating of sheep, in the quiet companionship of the flock. Where Cain saw what could be built, Abel saw what needed to be cared for. Their differences, while visible, were not yet dangerous. They were brothers. They ate together, played beneath fig trees, laughed over cracked fruits and cooling evenings. But the seeds of separation had begun to take root. Adam, though often silent, watched his sons with a quiet ache. He remembered walking with God in the cool of the day. He remembered the voice, the presence, and he taught his sons of it. Each morning and evening he recited the tale of Eden, of the serpent, the fruit, the fall. He told them how the Lord had clothed them with skins, how blood had been shed for the first time. He reminded them that sin had a price, that life was no longer theirs to define. Remember the sacrifice, he'd say, for it is the only way we draw near. Cain nodded, but inwardly he questioned. Why blood? Why death? Could the fruit of his labor not also please God? Abel, on the other hand, listened with trembling awe. His heart, like soft soil, received the words as seeds of reverence. One night, as the fire crackled low and the stars crowded the sky, Eve pulled her sons close and whispered of the cherubim with flaming swords guarding Eden's gate. You must understand, she said, we are far from the garden now. But God still sees. He still calls. Cain stared into the fire. I will bring him something worthy, he said. Abel looked down, fingers absently petting a lamb curled beside him. I will bring him what he desires. That night, the first line was drawn, not in anger, but in intent. By the time they became men, Cain had carved fields that fed not only their family but travelers from afar. He built granaries and terraced gardens, finding pleasure in structure and discipline. Others looked to him with admiration and quiet envy. Abel tended his sheep in the valleys, his days simple, his heart untroubled. He played the flute beneath olive trees and named each lamb as if it were family. His hands smelled of wool and sweet herbs, and his soul mirrored the skies he slept beneath. When the time of offering came, it was not by obligation, but by desire, to acknowledge the giver of life. Cain brought fruits and grains, artfully arranged, vibrant and ripe. His offering was the product of toil, sweat, and mastery. He stacked the produce with precision. A silent declaration. This is what I have made. Abel approached with a lamb, his firstborn, flawless and trembling. He built no grand display. He simply laid the creature on the altar, eyes moist, lips moving in a silent prayer. Fire fell, not from the sky but from the heavens themselves, divine, visible glory. It consumed Abel's offering with swift acceptance, leaving not ash but light. Cain's altar remained untouched. The fruit grew cold in the night air. He stared at it, disbelief crackling beneath his ribs. The eyes of his brother, wide with awe, felt like judgment. The silence around his altar screamed louder than thunder. His fists clenched, his jaw locked. His heart began to tremble, not with humility, but with rage. And the garden seemed farther away than ever. The fire that had accepted Abel's lamb still lingered in Cain's eyes. Not the divine flame that fell from heaven, but one born of envy and unspoken questions. Fire that smoldered in the hollows of his chest, that turned every sunrise into accusation, every shadow into suspicion. He had labored, he had planted, plucked, prepared. Was his sacrifice not beautiful? Did the soil not bear witness to his devotion? Did the sweat on his brow not count for something? But the altar remained silent, and that silence was louder than God's answer. Days passed, and the distance between the brothers grew like a vine gone wild, subtle, then sudden. Abel returned to his flock in the lowlands, singing softly to the lambs and tuning his flute beneath fig trees. He had not gloated, not once. Yet to Cain, every note of his song sounded like victory. Every gentle smile a reminder of acceptance Cain had not received. Abel was not trying to prove anything. He simply walked in peace. And that peace irritated Cain more than any boast could. Adam noticed the shift, so did Eve. She tried to bring them together, inviting both to the same meals, urging Cain to speak, to share, to unburden. But Cain had grown quiet, not with sorrow, but with calculation. He watched, he waited. In the deep furrows of his mind, thoughts twisted like thorns. Perhaps God favored shepherds. Perhaps blood mattered more than labor. Or perhaps, just perhaps, Abel was the problem. One afternoon, Cain stood alone on a ridge overlooking Abel's pasture. His hands were stained with earth, his tunic damp from the sweat of work. Below him, Abel laughed with a young lamb nestled in his arms. The wind toyed with his hair, and sunlight danced on his shoulders like favor descending. Cain turned away. That night, dreams haunted him, visions of a garden he could never return to, of altars that never burned, of a brother whose face glowed with light Cain could not claim. He woke with his fists clenched, breath heavy. Then came a voice, not his own, not Abel's, but one that pressed into his soul like thunder beneath the skin. "Why are you angry, Cain? And why has your face fallen?" Cain froze. His tent, his tools, the entire world held its breath. If you do well, will you not be accepted? But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. The voice faded like a passing storm, but the tension it left behind remained. Cain's lips curled. Rule over it? But Cain no longer wanted to rule over sin. He wanted to rule over his own pain and remove its reminder. In the following days, he tried to reason it away. Maybe it was just emotion. Maybe the voice had been a figment. But deep down, Cain knew. The line had been drawn, not just between himself and his brother, but between who he had been and who he was becoming. Abel, unaware of the storm brewing, continued to walk softly with God. He still spoke with Cain when he saw him, still offered him part of the milk or meat from his flock, still asked about the crops. But there was a guardedness in Cain's replies, a hollow sound in his laughter, like a drum struck in darkness. One evening, as twilight painted the sky in purples and golds, Cain approached Abel's tent. "I want to speak with you," he said. Abel, smiling, nodded. "Of course, brother." "Let's walk," Cain suggested. To the field. They walked side by side, as they had as boys, the same field they had once raced across barefoot, the same land where they dug holes and buried beetles, where they'd watched the stars emerge in perfect silence. Cain did not speak at first. Abel hummed a tune under his breath, soft and familiar. "You always sing," Cain muttered. Abel chuckled. "It helps the flock. Helps my soul, too." Cain glanced at him. "Why do you think your offering was accepted?" Abel grew quiet. "I don't know. I only offered what I believed was required, blood, the firstborn. It wasn't about the thing itself, Cain. It was the posture of the heart." Cain's jaw tensed. "And you think my heart is wrong?" Abel stopped walking. "No, I didn't say that. But you think it. I think sometimes we try to impress God instead of trust Him." Cain looked away. "You always speak like you know His mind." "No," Abel said softly. "I only try to know His heart." The field was wide, silent. No bird sang. Cain clenched his fists. His eyes stung. Why was Abel always so sure? Why did God smile on him? Why did peace follow him like a shadow while Cain's soul twisted like weeds? The weight became too much, and then it happened. A blow, a cry, a moment of silence so deep it cracked heaven. Abel fell. His body lay still, eyes open, looking at nothing. The breath, his name's very meaning, was gone. Cain staggered back, staring at what he had done. The soil beneath Abel's body darkened. For the first time since Eden, the earth drank innocent blood. And it wept. Cain fled the field, his hands red, his heart darker than any night. But the ground would not forget, nor would God. Before the blood cried from the ground, before the rage that spilled into murder, there was a moment of choice. It began not in violence, but in devotion. It began with an altar. The time had come again to give to the Lord. The changing seasons brought harvest and lambs, and with them the ancient memory, taught by Adam, remembered by Eve, that they owed everything to the giver. The one who still watched, even outside the gates of Eden. The land, though harsh, had yielded its bounty. Cain's fields overflowed with golden grain, plump fruit, and vegetables gleaming in the morning light. Abel's flock had grown fat on wild grass and sweet herbs, birthing lambs that frolicked under the sky. Both had much to bring, but what they would bring and how would determine far more than they knew. Cain rose early. The sun had not yet broken the line of the distant hills. He moved among his storehouses, selecting the best of his yield: figs without blemish, grapes full and round, bundles of wheat tied with careful string. His fingers moved with pride and precision, arranging the offering as one would prepare a royal gift. He worked hard. He had tamed the soil. He had bent the curse of thorns and thistles beneath his will. He had earned a right to be honored. This, he thought, is worthy of the Lord. He built his altar of stone, stacked meticulously, and laid his offering upon it. The fruit shone in the early light. He stood back and admired the beauty of his labor. He was ready. Abel, too, prepared. But his was a quieter preparation. He walked among his flock, heart heavy with reverence. His eyes searched for the right one. Not the smallest, not the sick, but the firstborn, the best. A lamb without spot or flaw. He found it near a hillside, its fleece like snow, eyes like soft glass. His hands trembled as he picked it up. He whispered to it, perhaps a song, perhaps a prayer. He remembered his father's stories of Eden, of the skins God made for them, of the shedding of innocent blood. He remembered Adam's words, without the shedding of blood there is no covering. Abel wept, and then he built an altar, rough, humble stones, no grandeur, only submission. He laid the lamb upon the altar. It did not resist. He lifted his eyes to heaven. My God, he whispered, receive what is yours. And the blade fell. Heaven responded. To Abel's altar, fire descended, pure, radiant, holy. It consumed the lamb in light, leaving behind a fragrance that rose like incense. A divine sign, unmistakable. The offering was accepted. Peace settled over Abel like a cloak. He fell to his knees, face in the earth. But on the other hill, Cain waited, and waited, and waited, but no fire came. His fruit remained untouched. The air grew thick, but not with glory. The altar stood proud, but the silence around it screamed. Cain's heart sank. Confusion crept in first, then disbelief, then anger. He stormed from the altar, fists clenched, heart pounding. Why? Why had God not responded? His offering had been beautiful, clean, abundant, better than anything Abel had raised from dirt and bleeding sheep. He had worked the ground by the sweat of his brow. Had he not earned favor? The idea twisted inside him. Maybe God is unfair. Maybe God is blind. Maybe... Abel tricked him. He avoided his brother's eyes. He no longer wanted peace. He wanted answers, or vengeance. Eve noticed his silence. Adam sensed the storm. One evening, Adam tried to speak with him beside the fire. Son, he said gently, tell me your burden. Cain didn't look up. I brought the best of what I had. It wasn't enough. Adam sighed. I've learned this, Cain. It's not only what we bring. It's the heart behind the offering. The lamb Abel gave, it cost him. Blood was shed. There is something in sacrifice that must reflect God's own grief. Cain's voice was sharp. So what I built, what I grew, none of it matters? No, Adam said carefully, it matters. But God sees beyond the surface. He wants obedience more than beauty, surrender more than splendor. Cain stood and walked away. The rage inside him grew teeth. That night, God came to him again. Cain did not see him, but he heard him, clearly, deeply, as though the words were etched on his bones. Cain, why are you angry? And why has your face fallen? Cain said nothing, but his soul burned. If you do well, will you not be accepted? Cain's chest rose and fell. But if you do not do well, sin is crouching at your door. Its desire is for you, but you must rule over it. Then the voice was gone, and Cain stood in the dark, listening not to heaven, but to the growl of something low and waiting. He returned to his altar the next day. The fruit had begun to rot. Flies buzzed around it. The once proud offering now mocked him. And still, Abel's field glowed with quiet favor. Cain stared across the distance. He would never be seen the same way again, not by his parents, not by God, not by anyone. He felt it, something clawing at the inside of his mind, urging, whispering. "You must rule over it." He laughed bitterly. "No," he muttered, "I will rule something else." He looked at the field. He looked at his brother. And in his mind, a path was already forming. The days after the offering felt longer than ever. Cain's steps grew heavier. He no longer worked his fields with joy, but with a mechanical drive. He still tilled, still harvested, but there was no song in his breath, no gratitude in his sweat. He labored not to feed the earth, but to silence the voice in his head. Abel, meanwhile, continued as before. He never flaunted the fire that had fallen. Never once did he raise the subject, but his peace, his ease of spirit, his closeness with God, it all grated on Cain like a jagged stone pressed into his chest. Cain couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not by God, but by Abel, as if his brother's very presence was a mirror reflecting everything Cain didn't want to see. One morning, Cain sat near the edge of the valley, the sky still painted in the lavender hues of dawn. He ran his fingers through the dirt absently. He didn't notice Eve approaching until she sat beside him. Her hands were worn and calloused, her hair streaked with the pale silver of years outside the garden, but her eyes still held warmth. "I saw Abel's flock this morning," she said softly. Cain grunted. "He was singing," she added. "Of course he was." Eve placed a hand on his shoulder. "Cain, what's weighing on your spirit?" He didn't respond. She watched him a moment longer. "You were my firstborn," she said. "When I held you, I believed you might be the one who would crush the serpent's head, the one who would restore Eden." Cain's heart tightened. "But now," she continued, her voice catching, "I see a shadow in your eyes." Cain stood suddenly. "You always loved him more." Eve's face crumpled in pain. "No, Cain, I love you both. I only wish—" "You wish I were more like him," he spat. "I wish you would listen to God's voice, not the one inside your anger." Cain walked away before she could say more. That evening, Cain wandered alone into the fields. The sun hung low, casting long shadows over the hills. He passed the remains of his altar, now half collapsed, stones scattered, fruit long devoured by insects. He kicked a stone. It clanged off another, sparking slightly. From the distance, he heard the soft bleating of sheep. Abel's flock, his brother's peace. He turned toward the sound, and within him something shifted. That night, sleep did not come. Cain lay in his tent, staring at the stars through the open roof. He remembered being a boy, tracing constellations with Abel, giving them names, some silly, some sacred. They used to imagine one day walking to the edge of the sky. Now the sky felt like a ceiling too high to reach. He sat up. The moonlight cast long shadows across the ground. He remembered the voice of God, "Sin is crouching at your door." But Cain didn't feel like something was crouching. He felt like something was already inside. The next day, Abel approached him near the river. "Cain," he said gently, "you haven't spoken to me much." Cain didn't look at him. Abel hesitated. I miss you. We're brothers." Cain's voice was hollow. "Are we?" Abel stepped closer. "You're hurting. I know you are. But I don't want to be your enemy." Cain finally turned to him. His eyes were tired, red, sharp. "Then stop being the favorite." Abel blinked. "Cain, I never asked to." "You didn't need to ask. You were chosen." "No," Abel said firmly. "I offered. And God saw my heart." Cain's nostrils flared, and he rejected mine. "Maybe he's asking for more. Maybe he's giving you a chance." Cain's lips trembled, not with sorrow but fury. "No, he's already chosen, just like everyone else." He turned and walked away, leaving Abel standing by the water, the reeds swaying between them like a veil. Cain returned to the fields that night, alone. He watched the stars again, but this time he wasn't naming them, he was cursing them. One of them flared briefly, a falling star shooting across the sky like a blade of fire. Cain took it as a sign, not of hope, but of power. The seed of jealousy had cracked open, and what was blooming now inside him was no longer envy, it was intent. The earth was quiet, but Cain's heart was not. The world around him still followed the rhythm of creation: sunrise, birdsong, rustling leaves. The sheep bleated, the streams murmured, and the wind carried the scent of ripe grain. But within Cain, the rhythm had broken. A different pulse now beat in his veins, one of bitterness, rejection, and burning pride. He had tried to silence it. He had tried to forget the offering. He had tried to bury the shame. But the voice of rejection was louder than anything else, and the voice of rage, rage that whispered that he had been wronged, had grown louder still. That night, he returned to the ruins of his altar. There was nothing left but cracked stones and the memory of silence. He stood there for a long time. Then he fell to his knees, not in prayer, but in frustration. "Why him?" he whispered. "Why not me?" His voice cracked. "I gave you the best of my hands. I worked the earth. I broke it open. I bled into that soil." He struck the altar stones with his fists until blood spilled from his knuckles. He screamed, but the sky was silent, or so he thought, until the wind changed. Suddenly, the silence around him deepened, not empty, but filled. The night air thickened with presence, as though something holy had stepped into the darkness and wrapped it in attention. And then the voice came again. "Cain." It was not thunder. It was not a whisper. It was presence itself, settling into every particle of the world around him. Cain trembled. "Why are you angry?" Cain said nothing. "And why has your face fallen?" Still he clenched his teeth. "If you do well, will you not be accepted?" The words echoed within him, shaking the foundation of every excuse he had built. "But if you do not do well," the voice slowed, waited. "Sin is crouching at the door." Cain's eyes flicked to the shadow beside him. It seemed deeper now, darker. He imagined it curled like a beast, waiting to pounce. "Its desire is for you," the voice warned, "but you must rule over it." And then, silence, not absence, just silence. Cain stood alone. The warning had come, clear, righteous, just. And for a moment his heart quivered. The door was still unopened. The beast still crouched but had not yet devoured him. But Cain's pride would not let go. He returned home before dawn. Eve was asleep. Adam, too. The campfires had burned low. He looked upon his parents and felt an old ache rise within him. He was the firstborn. He was supposed to lead. He was supposed to be the one. Instead, he was the shadow in everyone's story. That morning, Abel came to him again. He was cheerful, gentle, his face radiant with peace. He spoke of new lambs born in the night. He spoke of the stars he'd counted while watching the flock. He spoke of God's closeness, of dreams he'd had where Eden was restored. And he spoke Cain's name with the same warmth he'd used when they were boys racing through the fig trees. Cain listened, but not to the words. He listened to the sound underneath. The sound of a man who had what Cain thought he deserved. And in that moment the beast at the door pushed, and Cain opened it. Later that day he asked Abel to walk with him. "To the field," he said. Abel hesitated for a second. Something in Cain's eyes unsettled him, but he nodded. "Of course, brother." The sun hung heavy in the sky, casting long golden rays over the plains as Cain and Abel walked side by side into the field. The air was still, too still. Abel glanced at his brother. "You said you wanted to show me something?" Cain's voice was quiet. "Yes." They walked in silence for a few paces. Cain's steps were slow, deliberate. Abel's were light, unaware. He was still the same brother who trusted with an open heart, who believed reconciliation was always possible. The brother who thought good could rise even from hardened soil. But Cain's silence was not peace. It was a storm gathering. They stopped in a familiar place, a patch of earth they'd known since they were boys. Wildflowers still bloomed along the edges. A few stones marked where they had once built small altars during play. It was a sacred place, a memory. But something had shifted in Cain. He wasn't remembering, he was calculating. Abel turned to him, searching his eyes. "Cain, what's wrong?" Cain looked at his brother. The softness in Abel's gaze struck him like a blade. He wanted to yell. He wanted to scream, "Why did he choose you?" But the words stuck in his throat. Instead, his hand moved, fast, a stone in his grasp, a swing, a cry, a fall. The sound echoed through the field like thunder. Birds scattered from the trees. The earth shook, not visibly but spiritually, as though the soil itself recoiled. Abel lay motionless, his face to the sky, blood darkening the earth beneath him. Cain dropped the stone. His chest heaved, the moment froze. And in the terrifying stillness, reality shattered like glass. He knelt beside Abel. He shook him. "Get up," he whispered. No response. "Abel, please." Still nothing. Cain pulled back, his hands trembling. They were stained, not with dirt, but with his brother's blood. The first blood spilled by man upon man. The first murder. The earth was not silent. It moaned. It grieved. The soil, made to receive life, had now been forced to drink death. And it cried out. Cain stumbled away from the body, his breath ragged, his mind racing. What had he done? Not just to his brother, not just to his family, to himself. He had broken something no offering could mend. He ran. He did not know where, just away, from the body, from the blood, from the voice he feared would come again. But he could not outrun God. As the sun began to dip behind the hills, the voice returned, not as thunder, not as wrath, but as a question. One so gentle it shattered Cain more than judgment ever could. "Cain, where is your brother Abel?" Cain's breath caught in his throat. He knew God knew. Yet still the question came, not for information, but for confrontation. Cain responded, but not in confession. "I do not know," he lied. "Am I my brother's keeper?" The question hung in the air, defiant, bitter, but the voice did not waver. "What have you done?" The words were heavier now, not thunder, but grief. "The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground." Cain collapsed to his knees. The sky dimmed, as though creation itself was mourning. Then came the sentence. "Now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand." Cain wept. "When you till the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you." He wept harder. "A fugitive and a vagabond you shall be on the earth." And finally, Cain spoke truth. "My punishment is more than I can bear." Tears streamed down his face. "You have driven me out from your presence. I will be hidden from you. Anyone who finds me will kill me." But even then, even in judgment, God was still merciful. "No," the Lord said, "whoever kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And then, a mark, not of honor, not of blessing, but of protection. A sign that though Cain had spilled blood, no man was to spill his. Cain rose from the ground, marked, exiled, shattered. And he walked away from the field where he had killed his brother. He walked away from the home of his childhood. He walked away from the voices of his parents. He walked away from Eden, from God, from everything he could have been. And the earth wept, because innocence had died, and blood now stained the soil of creation. Cain wandered. He walked as one chased not by a man, but by the echoes of a voice he could no longer bear to hear. The fields that once bloomed under his hand now recoiled from his touch. His steps found no rest, no welcome. The earth itself turned cold beneath his feet. He was marked, not with a scar on his face nor a wound on his skin, but something deeper, an invisible seal set by God. It did not shine. It did not glow. Yet no man dared approach him with violence, for the fear of sevenfold vengeance burned into the memory of every witness. Still, the mark did not comfort Cain. It only reminded him, "You are the one who killed your brother." When he passed through villages, eyes turned. Mothers pulled their children close. Men stopped speaking. Women averted their gaze. They knew his name. Not Cain the farmer, not Cain the firstborn, but Cain the killer. No one asked for his side of the story. No one asked if he regretted it. No one dared. They only looked at him with a silent judgment deeper than death. Cain built nothing, not at first. He tried to sow seeds once, in a quiet patch of soil under the shade of distant trees. But the ground remained hard, dry, silent. The curse God had spoken had not been symbolic. The earth had indeed turned against him. He slept under the stars like an animal. He drank from rivers with trembling hands. He avoided firelight. He dreamed of Abel, his laugh, his hands, the tilt of his head when he listened. And always, the sound of that final breath echoed in his mind like a drumbeat of grief. But man was not made to wander forever. Eventually he found a land to the east of Eden, a desolate, untamed place called Nod, the land of wandering. It was a land without roots, a land without memory, fitting for one who had severed his own history. And there Cain built a city. The irony was sharp. He who had broken brotherhood now built walls. He who had silenced life now gathered others to forge a name. He who had spilled blood now fathered children. He named the city after his son, Enoch, as though he could build a legacy that would outlive his sin. But the foundation of the city was not peace, it was pain. Its streets were paved not with glory, but with the echo of blood crying from the ground. Back in Eden's shadow, Adam and Eve mourned. They buried their son with trembling hands. Abel's grave was marked not by stones, but by silence. Their tears fell upon the soil that had once drunk his blood. And Eve wept not only for the son who died, but for the son who lived on in exile. This was not the promise, she whispered. Adam said nothing. His hands were old now, his back bent from years of sorrow and toil. But in time, hope stirred once more. Another son was born, Seth, a name that meant granted or appointed. For God has appointed me another seed, Eve said, instead of Abel, whom Cain slew. Meanwhile, in the east, Cain aged. His hair turned to silver. His hands lost their strength. But the mark never faded. And though cities rose and people flourished from his line, he remained a man haunted. He rarely spoke of Abel. When his children asked, he only said, "He was my brother." When they pressed further, he would walk away. Sometimes, in the dead of night, he would sit beneath a tree alone and whisper into the sky, hoping no one heard. "Am I still my brother's keeper?" The city of Enoch pulsed with life. Children ran through narrow alleys. Merchants shouted in strange tongues. Blacksmiths hammered bronze into weapons, into tools, into monuments to their strength. Towers rose, walls stretched wide, and generations passed. Cain's descendants grew strong and clever, makers of instruments, builders of homes, pioneers of industry. But Cain watched them from the shadows. He was not king, not prophet, not patriarch. He was the man marked, and they all knew it. Some feared him, others revered him, but none understood him. In the depth of night, Cain would wander the outskirts of the city, far from torchlight and the hum of life. He moved like a ghost, slipping between rocks and trees, breathing in silence as though it were a prayer. He did not weep. His tears had dried long ago, but he remembered Abel's laugh, his gentleness, his voice offering a portion of milk or an apple from a tree. Cain had once hated that innocence. Now he longed for it. In one such walk, he stumbled upon a group of young men seated around a fire, telling stories of the old world, the garden, the fall, the angel with the flaming sword. One of them said Abel's name with reverence, as though he had been a hero, a saint. Cain paused in the darkness. He wanted to speak, to tell the boy what had really happened, to tell him about the moment of rage, the blindness, the weight of the stone. He opened his mouth, but no words came. What could he say? that he had been jealous, that he had ignored the warning, that he had killed peace with his own hands. So he walked on. In his dreams, Abel began to appear again, not in wrath, not in accusation, but in silence. He would stand beside the altar that once burned with fire, eyes calm. He would look at Cain, not with hate, but with sorrow. And Cain would always reach out, but he never touched him. He always woke before his hand found his brother's shoulder. One dawn, Cain sat on a hillside overlooking the city named after his son. The sun rose slow, stretching shadows across the land. He remembered the field, the moment, the breath that left Abel's body. He remembered the voice. Sin is crouching at your door. He had not ruled over it, it had ruled him, and though he was still breathing, he had been dead inside ever since. Cain lived many more years, enough to see generations rise and fall, enough to see how his children learned to shape the world, but not always to heal it. Violence had spread, blood begetting blood. Lamech, a descendant, one day boasted to his wives that he had killed a man simply for striking him. If Cain is avenged sevenfold, he declared, then Lamech 77-fold. Cain wept that night, for his legacy had become not repentance, but repetition. He died quietly. No one recorded his final words. No monument marked his resting place. Only the wind remembers where he lies, but the earth knows. The earth that drank blood remembers all. Back near Eden, Seth grew into a man of worship. From his line a child would be born, and from that child another, until, generations later, Noah would walk with God. And even further still, one would come whose blood would speak better things than that of Abel, a redeemer, a savior, one whose sacrifice would not cry from the ground for vengeance, but for forgiveness. The story of Cain and Abel is not just the story of the first murder. It is the story of man's choice between pride and humility, between worship that seeks attention and worship that seeks God. It is a story of warning, a story of mercy, a story of exile and hope. For though Abel died, his blood was not the end. And though Cain wandered, the voice still called. Even now, to us, sin is crouching at your door, but you must rule over it. The field still speaks. Do we still listen?